Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
6 shillings a week does not keep body and soul together very unitedly. They want to get away from each other when there is only such a very slight bond as that between them, and one day. I suppose. The pain and the dull monotony of it all had stood before her eyes plainer than usual, and the mocking spectre had frightened her. She had made one last appeal to friends, but against the chill wall of their respectability, the voice of the erring outcast fell unheeded, and then she had gone to see her child, had held it in her arms and kissed it, in a weary, dull sort of way, and without betraying any particular emotion of any kind, and had left it, after putting into its hand a penny box of chocolate she had bought it, and afterwards, with her last few shillings, had taken a ticket and come down to Goring. It seemed that the bitterest thoughts of her life must have centered about the wooded reaches and the bright green meadows around Goring, but women strangely hug the knife that stabs them. And, perhaps, amidst the gall, there may have mingled also sunny memories of sweetest hours, spent upon those shadowed deeps over which the great trees bend their branches down so low. She had wandered about the woods by the river's brink all day. And then, when evening fell and the grey twilight spread its dusky robe upon the waters, she stretched her arms out to the silent river that had known her sorrow and her joy. And the old river had taken her into its gentle arms, and had laid her weary head upon its bosom, and had hushed away the pain. Thus had she sinned in all things, sinned in living and in dying. God help her and all other sinners, if any more there be. Goring on the left bank and Streatley on the right are both or either charming places to stay at for a few days. The reaches down to Pangbourne were one for a sunny sail or for a moonlight row. And the country round about is full of beauty. We had intended to push on to Wallingford that day, but the sweet smiling face of the river here lured us to linger for a while, and so we left our boat at the bridge, and went up into Streatley, and lunched at the Bull, much to Montmorency's satisfaction. They say that the hills on each side of the stream here once joined and formed a barrier across what is now the Thames, and that then the river ended there above Goring in one vast lake. I am not in a position either to contradict or affirm this statement. I simply offer it. It is an ancient place, Streatley, dating back, like most riverside towns and villages, to British and Saxon times. Goring is not nearly so pretty a little spot to stop at as Streatley, if you have your choice, but it is passing fair enough in its way, and is nearer the railway in case you want to slip off without paying your hotel bill. Chapter 17. Washing Day. Fish and Fishers. On the art of angling. A conscientious fly fisher. A fishy story. We stayed 2 days at Streatley, and got our clothes washed. We had tried washing them ourselves, in the river, under George's superintendence, and it had been a failure. Indeed, it had been more than a failure, because we were worse off after we had washed our clothes than we were before. Before we had washed them, they had been very dirty. It is true, but they were just wearable. After we had washed them, well, The river between Reading and Henley was much cleaner after we had washed our clothes in it than it was before. All the dirt contained in the river between Reading and Henley we collected during that wash and worked it into our clothes. The washerwoman at Streatley said she felt she owed it to herself to charge us just 3 times the usual prices for that wash. She said it had not been like washing. It had been more in the nature of excavating. We paid the bill without a murmur. The neighbourhood of Streatley and Goring is a great fishing centre. There is some excellent fishing to be had here. The river abounds in pike, roach, dace, gudgeon, and eels. Just here, and you can sit and fish for them all day. Some people do. They never catch them. I never knew anybody catch anything up the Thames, except minnows and dead cats. But that has nothing to do, of course, with fishing. The local fisherman's guide doesn't say a word about catching anything. All it says is the place is a good station for fishing, and, from what I have seen of the district, I am quite prepared to bear out this statement. There is no spot in the world where you can get more fishing, or where you can fish for a longer period. Some fishermen come here and fish for a day, and others stop and fish for a month. You can hang on and fish for a year. If you want to, it will be all the same. The Angler's Guide to the Thames says that jack and perch are also to be had about here. But there the Angler's Guide is wrong. Jack and perch may be about there. Indeed, I know for a fact that they are. You can see them there in shoals. When you are out for a walk along the banks, they come and stand half out of the water with their mouths open for biscuits. And if you go for a bathe, they crowd round and get in your way and irritate you. But they are not to be had by a bit of worm on the end of a hook, nor anything like it, not they. I am not a good fisherman myself. I devoted a considerable amount of attention to the subject at one time, and was getting on, as I thought, fairly well, but the old hands told me that I should never be any real good at it, and advised me to give it up. They said that I was an extremely neat thrower, and that I seemed to have plenty of gumption for the thing, and quite enough constitutional laziness. But they were sure I should never make anything of a fisherman. I had not got sufficient imagination. They said that as a poet, or a shilling shocker, or a reporter, or anything of that kind, I might be satisfactory, but that, to gain any position as a Thames angler, would require more play of fancy, more power of invention than I appeared to possess. Some people are under the impression that all that is required to make a good fisherman is the ability to tell lies easily and without blushing, but this is a mistake. Mere bald fabrication is useless. The veriest tyro can manage that. It is in the circumstantial detail, the embellishing touches of probability, the general air of scrupulous, almost of pedantic veracity, that the experienced angler is seen. Anybody can come in and say, "Oh, I caught 15 dozen perch yesterday evening," or "Last Monday I landed a gudgeon, weighing 18 pounds, and measuring 3 feet from the tip to the tail." But there is no art, no skill, required for that sort of thing. It shows pluck. But that is all. No, your accomplished angler would scorn to tell a lie. That way, his method is a study in itself. He comes in quietly with his hat on, appropriates the most comfortable chair, lights his pipe, and commences to puff in silence. He lets the youngsters brag away for a while. And then, during a momentary lull, he removes the pipe from his mouth and remarks, as he knocks the ashes out against the bars, "Well, I had a haul on Tuesday evening that it's not much good my telling anybody about." "Oh, why's that?" they ask. "Because I don't expect anybody would believe me if I did," replies the old fellow calmly, and without even a tinge of bitterness in his tone, as he refills his pipe and requests the landlord to bring him 3 of scotch. Cold. There is a pause after this, nobody feeling sufficiently sure of himself to contradict the old gentleman. So he has to go on by himself without any encouragement. "No," he continues thoughtfully, "I shouldn't believe it myself if anybody told it to me. But it's a fact. For all that, I had been sitting there all the afternoon and had caught literally nothing, except a few dozen dace and a score of jack, and I was just about giving it up as a bad job when I suddenly felt a rather smart pull at the line. I thought it was another little one, and I went to jerk it up. Hang me. If I could move the rod, it took me half an hour, sir, to land that fish, and every moment I thought the line was going to snap, I reached him at last. And what do you think it was? A sturgeon, a 40-pound sturgeon taken on a line. Sir, yes. You may well look surprised. I'll have another 3 of scotch. Landlord, please." And then he goes on to tell of the astonishment of everybody who saw it, and what his wife said when he got home, and of what Joe Buggles thought about it. I asked the landlord of an inn up the river once if it did not injure him sometimes, listening to the tales that the fishermen about there told him, and he said, "Oh, no, not now. Sir, it did use to knock me over a bit at first. But, Lord love you, me and the missus, we listens to 'em all day now. It's what you're used to. You know, it's what you're used to." I knew a young man once. He was a most conscientious fellow. And, when he took to fly fishing, he determined never to exaggerate his hauls by more than 25%. "When I have caught 40 fish," said he, "then I will tell people that I have caught 50, and so on. But I will not lie any more than that, because it is sinful to lie." But the 25% plan did not work well at all. He never was able to use it. The greatest number of fish he ever caught in one day was 3. And you can't add 25% to 3 at least. Not in fish. So he increased his percentage to 33 and a third. But that, again, was awkward when he had only caught 1 or 2, so, to simplify matters, he made up his mind to just double the quantity. He stuck to this arrangement for a couple of months, and then he grew dissatisfied with it. Nobody believed him when he told them that he only doubled, and he, therefore, gained no credit that way whatever, while his moderation put him at a disadvantage among the other anglers, when he had really caught 3 small fish, and said he had caught 6. It used to make him quite jealous to hear a man, whom he knew for a fact had only caught 1, going about telling people he had landed 2 dozen. So, eventually, he made one final arrangement with himself, which he has religiously held to ever since, and that was to count each fish that he caught as 10, and to assume 10 to begin with. For example, if he did not catch any fish at all, then he said he had caught 10 fish. You could never catch less than 10 fish by his system. That was the foundation of it. Then, if by any chance he really did catch 1 fish, he called it 20, while 2 fish would count 30, 3 40, and so on. It is a simple and easily worked plan, and there has been some talk lately of its being made use of by the angling fraternity in general. Indeed, the committee of the Thames Anglers Association did recommend its adoption about 2 years ago, but some of the older members opposed it. They said they would consider the idea if the number were doubled, and each fish counted as 20. If ever you have an evening to spare up the river, I should advise you to drop into one of the little village inns and take a seat in the tap room. You will be nearly sure to meet 1 or 2 old rudmen sipping their toddy there, and they will tell you enough fishy stories in half an hour to give you indigestion for a month. George and I don't know what had become of Harris. He had gone out and had a shave early in the afternoon, and had then come back and spent full 40 minutes in pipelaying his shoes. We had not seen him since, George and I. Therefore, and the dog, left to ourselves, went for a walk to Wallingford on the second evening. And, coming home, we called in at a little riverside inn for a rest and other things. We went into the parlor and sat down. There was an old fellow there, smoking a long clay pipe, and we naturally began chatting. He told us that it had been a fine day today, and we told him that it had been a fine day yesterday. And then we all told each other that we thought it would be a fine day tomorrow, and George said the crops seemed to be coming up nicely. After that it came out, somehow or other, that we were strangers in the neighborhood, and that we were going away the next morning. Then a pause ensued in the conversation, during which our eyes wandered round the room. They finally rested upon a dusty old glass case, fixed very high up above the chimney-piece, and containing a trout. It rather fascinated me. That trout, it was such a monstrous fish. In fact, at first glance, I thought it was a cod. Ah, said the old gentleman, following the direction of my gaze. Fine fellow that, ain't he? Quite uncommon, I murmured, and George asked the old man how much he thought it weighed. 18 pounds 6 ounces, said our friend, rising and taking down his coat. Yes, he continued, it were 16 year ago, come the 3rd o' next month, that I landed him. I caught him just below the bridge with a minnow. They told me he were in the river, and I said I'd have him. And so I did. You don't see many fish that size about here now. I'm thinking, good night, gentlemen, good night. And out he went, and left us alone. We could not take our eyes off the fish after that. It really was a remarkably fine fish. We were still looking at it when the local carrier, who had just stopped at the inn, came to the door of the room with a pot of beer in his hand. And he also looked at the fish. Good-sized trout. That, said George, turning round to him. Ah, you may well say that, sir, replied the man, and then, after a pull at his beer, he added, maybe you wasn't here, sir, when that fish was caught. No, we told him. We were strangers in the neighborhood. Ah, said the carrier. Then, of course, how should you? It was nearly 5 years ago that I caught that trout. Oh, was it you who caught it? Then said I. Yes, sir, replied the genial old fellow. I caught him just below the lock, leastways. What was the lock then, one Friday afternoon, and the remarkable thing about it is that I caught him with a fly. I'd gone out pike fishing. Bless you, never thinking of a trout. And when I saw that whopper on the end of my line, blessed if it didn't quite take me aback. Well, you see, he weighed 26 pound. Good night, gentlemen. Good night. 5 minutes afterwards, a third man came in and described how he had caught it early one morning with Blake, and then he left. And a stolid, solemn-looking, middle-aged individual came in and sat down over by the window. None of us spoke for a while, but at length George turned to the newcomer and said, I beg your pardon. I hope you will forgive the liberty that we, perfect strangers in the neighborhood, are taking. But my friend here and myself would be so much obliged if you would tell us how you caught that trout up there. Why, who told you I caught that trout? Was the surprised query. We said that nobody had told us so, but somehow or other we felt instinctively that it was he who had done it. Well, it's a most remarkable thing, most remarkable, answered the stolid stranger, laughing because, as a matter of fact, you are quite right. I did catch it. But fancy you're guessing it like that. Dear me, it's really a most remarkable thing. And then he went on and told us how it had taken him half an hour to land it, and how it had broken his rod. He said he had weighed it carefully when he reached home, and it had turned the scale at 34 pounds. He went in his turn, and when he was gone, the landlord came in to us. We told him the various histories we had heard about his trout, and he was immensely amused, and we all laughed very heartily. Fancy Jim Bates and Joe Muggles and Mr. Jones and old Billy Maunders all telling you that they had caught it. Heart, Will. That is good, said the honest old fellow, laughing heartily. Yes, they are the sort to give it me, to put up in my parlour. If they had caught it, they are hard. And then he told us the real history of the fish. It seemed that he had caught it himself, years ago, when he was quite a lad, not by any art or skill, but by that unaccountable luck that appears to always wait upon a boy when he plays the wag from school and goes out fishing on a sunny afternoon with a bit of string tied on to the end of a tree. He said that bringing home that trout had saved him from a whacking, and that even his schoolmaster had said it was worth the rule of 3 and practice put together. He was called out of the room at this point, and George and I again turned our gaze upon the fish. It really was a most astonishing trout. The more we looked at it, the more we marveled at it. It excited George so much that he climbed up on the back of a chair to get a better view of it. And then the chair slipped, and George clutched wildly at the trout case to save himself. And down it came with a crash. George and the chair on top of it. "You haven't injured the fish, have you?" I cried in alarm, rushing up. "I hope not," said George, rising cautiously and looking about. But he had. That trout lay shattered into 1,000 fragments. I say 1,000. But they may have only been 900. I did not count them. We thought it strange and unaccountable that a stuffed trout should break up into little pieces like that. And so it would have been strange and unaccountable if it had been a stuffed trout. But it was not. That trout was plaster of Paris. Chapter 18. Locked. George and I are photographed. Wallingford, Dorchester, Abingdon. A family man. A good spot for drowning. A difficult bit of water. Demoralizing effect of river air. We left Streatley early the next morning and pulled up to Culham and slept under the canvas in the backwaters there. The river is not extraordinarily interesting between Streatley and Wallingford. From Cleve, you get a stretch of 6.5 miles without a lock. I believe this is the longest uninterrupted stretch anywhere above Teddington, and the Oxford Club make use of it for their trial 8s. But however satisfactory this absence of locks may be to rowing men, it is to be regretted by the mere pleasure seeker. For myself, I am fond of locks. They pleasantly break the monotony of the pulls. I like sitting in the boat and slowly rising out of the cool depths up into new reaches and fresh views, or sinking down, as it were, out of the world, and then waiting while the gloomy gates creak, and the narrow strip of daylight between them widens till the fair smiling river lies full before you, and you push your little boat out from its brief prison on to the welcoming waters once again. They are picturesque little spots, these locks. The stout old lock-keeper, or his cheerful-looking wife, or bright-eyed daughter, are pleasant folk to have a passing chat with. 287, you meet other boats there, and river gossip is exchanged. The Thames would not be the fairyland it is without its flower-decked locks. Talking of locks reminds me of an accident, George, and I very nearly had one summer's morning at Hampton Court. It was a glorious day, and the lock was crowded, and, as is a common practice up the river, a speculative photographer was taking a picture of us all as we lay upon the rising waters. I did not catch what was going on at first, and was, therefore, extremely surprised at noticing George hurriedly smooth out his trousers, ruffle up his hair, and stick his cap on in a rakish manner at the back of his head. And then, assuming an expression of mingled affability and sadness. Sit down in a graceful attitude and try to hide his feet. My first idea was that he had suddenly caught sight of some girl he knew, and I looked about to see who it was. Everybody in the lock seemed to have been suddenly struck wooden. They were all standing or sitting about in the most quaint and curious attitudes I have ever seen off a Japanese fan. All the girls were smiling. Oh, they did look so sweet, and all the fellows were frowning and looking stern and noble. And then, at last, the truth flashed across me, and I wondered if I should be in time. Ours was the first boat, and it would be unkind of me to spoil the man's picture, I thought. So I faced round quickly and took up a position in the prow, where I leant with careless grace upon the hitcher, in an attitude suggestive of agility and strength. I arranged my hair with a curl over the forehead, and threw an air of tender wistfulness into my expression, mingled with a touch of cynicism, which I am told suits me. As we stood, waiting for the eventful moment, I heard someone behind call out, "Hi, look at your nose." But I could not turn round to see what was the matter, and whose nose it was that was to be looked at. I stole a side glance at George's nose. It was all right at all events. There was nothing wrong with it that could be altered. I squinted down at my own, and that seemed all that could be expected also. "Look at your nose, you stupid ass," came the same voice again, louder, and then another voice cried, "Push your nose out. Can't you? You too with the dog." Neither George nor I dared to turn round. The man's hand was on the cap, and the picture might be taken any moment. Was it us they were calling to? What was the matter with our noses? Why were they to be pushed out? But now the whole lock started yelling, and a stentorian voice from the back shouted, "Look at your boat, sir, you in the red and black caps. It's your two corpses that will get taken in that photo, if you ain't quick." But we looked then, and saw that the nose of our boat had got fixed under the woodwork of the lock, while the incoming water was rising all around it, and tilting it up. In another moment we should be over. Quick as thought, we each seized an oar, and a vigorous blow against the side of the lock with the butt ends released the boat, and sent us sprawling on our backs. We did not come out well in that photograph, George and I. Of course, as was to be expected, our luck ordained it, that the man should set his wretched machine in motion at the precise moment that we were both lying on our backs with a wild expression of "Where am I, and what is it?" on our faces, and our 4 feet waving madly in the air. Our feet were undoubtedly the leading article in that photograph. Indeed, very little else was to be seen. They filled up the foreground entirely. Behind them, you caught glimpses of the other boats and bits of the surrounding scenery, but everything and everybody else in the lock looked so utterly insignificant and paltry compared with our feet, that all the other people felt quite ashamed of themselves, and refused to subscribe to the picture. The owner of one steam launch, who had bespoke 6 copies, rescinded the order on seeing the negative. He said he would take them if anybody could show him his launch. But nobody could. It was somewhere behind George's right foot. There was a good deal of unpleasantness over the business. The photographer thought we ought to take a dozen copies each, seeing that the photo was about 9/10 us. But we declined. We said we had no objection to being photoed full length, but we preferred being taken the right way up. Wallingford, 6 miles above Streatley, is a very ancient town and has been an active centre for the making of English history. It was a rude, mud-built town in the time of the Britons, who squatted there until the Roman legions evicted them and replaced their clay-baked walls by mighty fortifications, the trace of which time has not yet succeeded in sweeping away. So well those old-world masons knew how to build. But time, though he halted at Roman walls, soon crumbled Romans to dust and on the ground. In later years, fought savage Saxons and huge Danes, until the Normans came. It was a walled and fortified town up to the time of the Parliamentary War, when it suffered a long and bitter siege from Fairfax. It fell at last, and then the walls were raised. From Wallingford up to Dorchester, the neighbourhood of the river grows more hilly, varied, and picturesque. Dorchester stands half a mile from the river. It can be reached by paddling up the Thames, if you have a small boat, but the best way is to leave the river at Dayslock and take a walk across the fields. Dorchester is a delightfully peaceful old place, nestling in stillness and silence and drowsiness. Dorchester, like Wallingford, was a city in ancient British times. It was then called Caerdoran, the city on the water. In more recent times, the Romans formed a great camp here, the fortifications surrounding which now seem like low, even hills. In Saxon days, it was the capital of Wessex. It is very old, and it was very strong and great once. Now it sits aside from the stirring world, and nods and dreams. Round Clifton Hampton, itself a wonderfully pretty village, old-fashioned, peaceful, and dainty with flowers. The river scenery is rich and beautiful. If you stay the night on land at Clifton, you cannot do better than put up at the barley mow. It is, without exception, I should say, the quaintest, most old-world inn up the river. It stands on the right of the bridge, quite away from the village. Its low-pitched gables and thatched roof and latticed windows give it quite a storybook appearance, while inside it is even still more once-upon-a-timeified. It would not be a good place for the heroine of a modern novel to stay at. The heroine of a modern novel is always divinely tall, and she is ever drawing herself up to her full height. At the barley mow, she would bump her head against the ceiling each time she did this. It would also be a bad house for a drunken man to put up at. There are too many surprises in the way of unexpected steps down into this room and up into that, and as for getting upstairs to his bedroom, or ever finding his bed when he got up, either operation would be an utter impossibility to him. We were up early the next morning, as we wanted to be in Oxford by the afternoon. It is surprising how early one can get up. When camping out, one does not yearn for just another 5 minutes nearly so much. Lying wrapped up in a rug on the boards of a boat, with a Gladstone bag for a pillow, as one does in a feather bed. We had finished breakfast and were through Clifton Lock by 8:30. From Clifton to Culham, the river banks are flat, monotonous, and uninteresting. But after you get through Culham Lock, the coldest and deepest lock on the river, the landscape improves. At Abingdon, the river passes by the streets. Abingdon is a typical country town of the smaller order, quiet, eminently respectable, clean, and desperately dull. It prides itself on being old, but whether it can compare in this respect with Wallingford and Dorchester seems doubtful. A famous abbey stood here once, and within what is left of its sanctified walls they brew bitter ale nowadays. In St. Nicholas Church at Abingdon, there is a monument to John Blackwell and his wife Jane, who both, after leading a happy married life, died on the very same day, August 21, 1625, and in St. Helen's Church, it is recorded that W. Lee, who died in 1637, had in his lifetime issue from his loins 200 lacking but 3. If you work this out, you will find that Mr. W. Lee's family numbered 197. Mr. W. Lee, 5 times Mayor of Abingdon, was, no doubt, a benefactor to his generation. But I hope there are not many of his kind about in this overcrowded 19th century. From Abingdon to Nuneham Courtenay is a lovely stretch. Nuneham Park is well worth a visit. It can be viewed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The house contains a fine collection of pictures and curiosities, and the grounds are very beautiful. The pool under Sandford Lasher, just behind the lock, is a very good place to drown yourself in. The undercurrent is terribly strong, and if you once get down into it, you are all right. An obelisk marks the spot where 2 men have already been drowned while bathing there, and the steps of the obelisk are generally used as a diving board by young men now who wish to see if the place really is dangerous. Iffley Lock and Mill, a mile before you reach Oxford, is a favourite subject with the river-loving brethren of the brush. The real article, however, is rather disappointing. After the pictures, few things, I have noticed, come quite up to the pictures of them. In this world, we passed through Iffley Lock at about 12:30, and then, having tidied up the boat and made all ready for landing, we set to work on our last mile. Between Iffley and Oxford is the most difficult bit of the river I know. You want to be born on that bit of water to understand it. I have been over it a fairish number of times, but I have never been able to get the hang of it. The man who could row a straight course from Oxford to Iffley ought to be able to live comfortably under one roof with his wife, his mother-in-law, his elder sister, and the old servant who was in the family when he was a baby. First, the current drives you on to the right bank, and then on to the left. Then it takes you out into the middle, turns you round 3 times, and carries you upstream again, and always ends by trying to smash you up against a college barge. Of course, As a consequence of this, we got in the way of a good many other boats during the mile, and they in ours. And, of course, as a consequence of that, a good deal of bad language occurred. I don't know why it should be, but everybody is always so exceptionally irritable on the river. Little mishaps that you would hardly notice on dry land drive you nearly frantic with rage. When they occur on the water, when Harris or George makes an ass of himself on dry land, I smile indulgently when they behave in a chucklehead way on the river. I use the most blood-curdling language to them. When another boat gets in my way, I feel I want to take an oar and kill all the people in it. The mildest-tempered people, when on land, become violent and bloodthirsty when in a boat. I did a little boating once with a young lady. She was naturally of the sweetest and gentlest disposition imaginable. But on the river it was quite awful to hear her. "Oh, drat the man," she would exclaim. When some unfortunate sculler would get in her way, why don't he look where he's going? And, "Oh, bother the silly old thing," she would say indignantly, when the sail would not go up properly, and she would catch hold of it and shake it quite brutally. Yet, as I have said, when on shore she was kind-hearted and amiable enough. The air of the river has a demoralizing effect upon one's temper. And this it is, I suppose, which causes even bargemen to be sometimes rude to one another, and to use language which, no doubt, in their calmer moments they regret. Chapter 19. Oxford. Montmorency's idea of heaven. The hired upriver boat. Its beauties and advantages. The pride of the Thames. The weather changes. The river under different aspects. Not a cheerful evening. Yearnings for the unattainable. The cheery chat goes round. George performs upon the banjo. A mournful melody. Another wet day. Flight. A little supper and a toast. We spent 2 very pleasant days at Oxford. There are plenty of dogs in the town of Oxford. Montmorency had 11 fights on the first day, and 14 on the second, and evidently thought he had got to heaven. Among folk too constitutionally weak, or too constitutionally lazy, whichever it may be, to relish upstream work. It is a common practice to get a boat at Oxford and row down for the energetic. However, the upstream journey is certainly to be preferred. It does not seem good to be always going with the current. There is more satisfaction in squaring one's back and fighting against it, and winning one's way forward in spite of it, at least. So I feel when Harris and George are sculling and I am steering. To those who do contemplate making Oxford their starting place, I would say, take your own boat unless, of course, you can take someone else's without any possible danger of being found out. The boats that, as a rule, are let for hire on the Thames above Marlow are very good boats. They are fairly watertight, and so long as they are handled with care, they rarely come to pieces or sink. There are places in them to sit down on, and they are complete with all the necessary arrangements or nearly all, to enable you to row them and steer them. But they are not ornamental. The boat you hire up the river above Marlow is not the sort of boat in which you can flash about and give yourself airs. The hired upriver boat very soon puts a stop to any nonsense of that sort on the part of its occupants. That is its chief, one may say, its only recommendation. The man in the hired upriver boat is modest and retiring. He likes to keep on the shady side, underneath the trees, and to do most of his traveling early in the morning or late at night, when there are not many people about on the river to look at him. When the man in the hired upriver boat sees anyone he knows, he gets out on to the bank and hides behind a tree. I was one of a party who hired an upriver boat one summer for a few days' trip. We had none of us ever seen the hired upriver boat before, and we did not know what it was when we did see it. We had written for a boat, a double-sculling skiff, and when we went down with our bags to the yard and gave our names, the man said, "Hello, yes, you're the party that wrote for a double-sculling skiff. It's all right. Jim, fetch round the Pride of the Thames." The boy went and reappeared 5 minutes afterwards, struggling with an antediluvian chunk of wood that looked as though it had been recently dug out of somewhere, and dug out carelessly, so as to have been unnecessarily damaged in the process. My own idea, on first catching sight of the object, was that it was a Roman relic of some sort. Relic of what I do not know. Possibly of a coffin. The neighborhood of the Upper Thames is rich in Roman relics, and my surmise seemed to me a very probable one, but our serious young man, who is a bit of a geologist, pooh-poohed my Roman relics theory, and said it was clear to the meanest intellect, in which category he seemed to be grieved that he could not conscientiously include mine, that the thing the boy had found was the fossil of a whale, and he pointed out to us various evidences proving that it must have belonged to the preglacial period. To settle the dispute, we appealed to the boy. We told him not to be afraid, but to speak the plain truth. Was it the fossil of a pre-Adamite whale? Or was it an early Roman coffin? The boy said it was the Pride of the Thames. We thought this a very humorous answer on the part of the boy at first, and somebody gave him twopence as a reward for his ready wit, but when he persisted in keeping up the joke, as we thought, too long, we got vexed with him. Come, my lad," said our captain sharply. "Don't let us have any nonsense. You take your mother's washing tub home again, and bring us a boat." The boat builder himself came up then, and assured us, on his word, as a practical man, that the thing really was a boat, in fact, the boat, the double-sculling skiff, selected to take us on our trip down the river. We grumbled a good deal. We thought he might, at least, have had it whitewashed or tarred, had something done to it to distinguish it from a bit of a wreck, but he could not see any fault in it. He even seemed offended at our remarks. He said he had picked us out the best boat in all his stock, and he thought we might have been more grateful. He said it, the Pride of the Thames, had been in use, just as it now stood, or rather as it now hung together, for the last 40 years. to his knowledge, and nobody had complained of it before, and he did not see why we should be the first to begin. We argued no more. We fastened the so-called boat together with some pieces of string, got a bit of wallpaper and pasted over the shabbier places, said our prayers, and stepped on board. They charged us 35 shillings for the loan of the remnant for 6 days, and we could have bought the thing out and out for 4 and 6pence at any sale of driftwood round the coast. The weather changed on the 3rd day. Oh, I am talking about our present trip now. And we started from Oxford upon our homeward journey in the midst of a steady drizzle. The river, with the sunlight flashing from its dancing wavelets, gilding gold the grey-green beach trunks, glinting through the dark, cool wood paths, chasing shadows o'er the shallows, flinging diamonds from the mill wheels, throwing kisses to the lilies, wantoning with the Weir's white waters, silvering moss-grown walls and bridges, brightening every tiny townlet, making sweet each lane and meadow, lying tangled in the rushes, peeping, laughing from each inlet, gleaming gay on many a far sail, making soft the air with glory is a golden fairy stream, but the river chill and weary, with the ceaseless raindrops falling on its brown and sluggish waters, with a sound as of a woman, weeping low in some dark chamber, while the woods, all dark and silent, shrouded in their mists of vapor, stand like ghosts upon the margin, silent ghosts with eyes reproachful, like the ghosts of evil actions, like the ghosts of friends neglected, is a spirit-haunted water through the land of vain regrets. Sunlight is the lifeblood of nature. Mother Earth looks at us with such dull, soulless eyes. When the sunlight has died away from out of her, it makes us sad to be with her then. She does not seem to know us or to care for us. She is as a widow who has lost the husband she loved, and her children touch her hand and look up into her eyes, but gain no smile from her. We rode on all that day through the rain, and very melancholy work it was. We pretended, at first, that we enjoyed it. We said it was a change, and that we liked to see the river under all its different aspects. We said we could not expect to have it all sunshine, nor should we wish it. We told each other that nature was beautiful, even in her tears. Indeed, Harris and I were quite enthusiastic about the business for the first few hours, and we sang a song about a gypsy's life, and how delightful a gypsy's existence was, free to storm and sunshine, and to every wind that blew, and how he enjoyed the rain, and what a lot of good it did him, and how he laughed at people who didn't like it. George took the fun more soberly, and stuck to the umbrella. We hoisted the cover before we had lunch, and kept it up all the afternoon, just leaving a little space in the bow, from which one of us could paddle and keep a lookout. In this way we made 9 miles, and pulled up for the night a little below Day's Lock. I cannot honestly say that we had a merry evening. The rain poured down with quiet persistency. Everything in the boat was damp and clammy. Supper was not a success. Cold veal pie, when you don't feel hungry, is apt to cloy. I felt I wanted whitebait and a cutlet, Harris babbled of soles and white sauce, and passed the remains of his pie to Montmorency, who declined it, and, apparently insulted by the offer, went and sat over at the other end of the boat by himself. George requested that we would not talk about these things, at all events until he had finished his cold-boiled beef without mustard. We played penny nap after supper. We played for about an hour and a half, by the end of which time George had won fourpence. George always is lucky at cards, and Harris and I had lost exactly twopence each. We thought we would give up gambling then. As Harris said, it breeds an unhealthy excitement when carried too far. George offered to go on and give us our revenge, but Harris and I decided not to battle any further against fate. After that, we mixed ourselves some toddy and sat round and talked. George told us about a man he had known, who had come up the river 2 years ago and who had slept out in a damp boat on just such another night as that was. And it had given him rheumatic fever, and nothing was able to save him, and he had died in great agony 10 days afterwards. George said he was quite a young man, and was engaged to be married. He said it was one of the saddest things he had ever known, and that put Harris in mind of a friend of his, who had been in the volunteers, and who had slept out under canvas one wet night down at Aldershot, on just such another night as this. Said Harris, and he had woke up in the morning a cripple for life. Harris said he would introduce us both to the man when we got back to town. It would make our hearts bleed to see him. This naturally led to some pleasant chat about sciatica, fevers, chills, lung diseases, and bronchitis, and Harris said how very awkward it would be if one of us were taken seriously ill in the night, seeing how far away we were from a doctor. There seemed to be a desire for something frolicsome to follow upon this conversation, and in a weak moment I suggested that George should get out his banjo and see if he could not give us a comic song. I will say for George that he did not want any pressing. There was no nonsense about having left his music at home, or anything of that sort. He at once fished out his instrument and commenced to play Two Lovely Black Eyes. I had always regarded Two Lovely Black Eyes as rather a commonplace tune until that evening. The rich vein of sadness that George extracted from it quite surprised me. The desire that grew upon Harris and myself, as the mournful strains progressed, was to fall upon each other's necks and weep, but by great effort we kept back the rising tears, and listened to the wild yearnful melody in silence. When the chorus came, we even made a desperate effort to be merry. We refilled our glasses and joined in, Harris, in a voice trembling with emotion, leading, and George and I following a few words behind. Two lovely black eyes, oh, what a surprise, only for telling a man he was wrong. Two. There we broke down. The unutterable pathos of George's accompaniment to that too we were, in our then state of depression, unable to bear. Harris sobbed like a little child, and the dog howled till I thought his heart or his jaw must surely break. George wanted to go on with another verse. He thought that when he had got a little more into the tune, and could throw more abandon, as it were, into the rendering, it might not seem so sad. The feeling of the majority, however, was opposed to the experiment. There being nothing else to do, we went to bed, that is. We undressed ourselves and tossed about at the bottom of the boat for some 3 or 4 hours, after which we managed to get some fitful slumber until 5 a.m., when we all got up and had breakfast. The second day was exactly like the first. The rain continued to pour down, and we sat, wrapped up in our mackintoshes, underneath the canvas, and drifted slowly down. One of us, I forget which one now, but I rather think it was myself, made a few feeble attempts during the course of the morning to work up the old gypsy foolishness about being children of nature and enjoying the wet, but it did not go down well at all. That I care not for the rain, not I, was so painfully evident, as expressing the sentiments of each of us, that to sing it seemed unnecessary. On one point we were all agreed, and that was that, come what might, we would go through with this job to the bitter end. We had come out for a fortnight's enjoyment on the river, and a fortnight's enjoyment on the river we meant to have. If it killed us, well, that would be a sad thing for our friends and relations. But it could not be helped. We felt that to give in to the weather in a climate such as ours would be a most disastrous precedent. It's only 2 days more, said Harris, and we are young and strong. We may get over it all right. After all, at about 4 o'clock, we began to discuss our arrangements for the evening. We were a little past Goring then, and we decided to paddle on to Pangbourne and put up there for the night. Another jolly evening, murmured George. We sat and mused on the prospect. We should be in at Pangbourne by 5. We should finish dinner at, say, 6:30. After that we could walk about the village in the pouring rain until bedtime, or we could sit in a dimly lit bar parlour and read the almanac. Why, the Alhambra would be almost more lively, said Harris, venturing his head outside the cover for a moment and taking a survey of the sky. With a little supper at the to follow, I added, half unconsciously, yes, it's almost a pity we've made up our minds to stick to this boat, answered Harris, and then there was silence for a while. If we hadn't made up our minds to contract our certain deaths in this bally old coffin, observed George, casting a glance of intense malevolence over the boat. It might be worth while to mention that there's a train leaves Pangbourne, I know, soon after 5, which would just land us in town in comfortable time to get a chop, and then go on to the place you mentioned afterwards. But nobody spoke. We looked at one another, and each one seemed to see his own mean and guilty thoughts reflected in the faces of the others. In silence, we dragged out and overhauled the Gladstone. We looked up the river and down the river. Not a soul was in sight. 20 minutes later, 3 figures, followed by a shamed-looking dog, might have been seen creeping stealthily from the boathouse at the Swan towards the railway station, dressed in the following neither neat nor gaudy costume: black leather shoes, dirty suit of boating flannels, very dirty brown felt hat, much battered mackintosh, very wet umbrella. We had deceived the boatman at Pangbourne. We had not had the face to tell him that we were running away from the rain. We had left the boat, and all it contained, in his charge, with instructions that it was to be ready for us at 9 the next morning. We said, if anything unforeseen should happen, preventing our return, we would write to him. We reached Paddington at 7 and drove direct to the restaurant I have before described, where we partook of a light meal, left Montmorency, together with suggestions for a supper to be ready at 10:30, and then continued our way to Leicester Square. We attracted a good deal of attention at the Alhambra. On our presenting ourselves at the paybox, we were gruffly directed to go round to Castle Street, and were informed that we were half an hour behind our time. We convinced the man, with some difficulty, that we were not the world-renowned contortionists from the Himalaya mountains, and he took our money and let us pass. Inside, we were a still greater success. Our fine bronzed countenances and picturesque clothes were followed round the place with admiring gaze. We were the cynosure of every eye. It was a proud moment for us all. We adjourned soon after the first ballet, and wended our way back to the restaurant, where supper was already awaiting us. I must confess to enjoying that supper. For about 10 days we seem to have been living, more or less, on nothing but cold meat, cake, and bread and jam. It had been a simple, a nutritious diet, but there had been nothing exciting about it. And the odor of Burgundy, and the smell of French sauces, and the sight of clean napkins and long loaves, knocked as a very welcome visitor at the door of our inner man. We pegged and quaffed away in silence for a while, until the time came when, instead of sitting bolt upright and grasping the knife and fork firmly, we leant back in our chairs and worked slowly and carelessly when we stretched out our legs beneath the table, let our napkins fall, unheeded, to the floor, and found time to more critically examine the smoky ceiling than we had hitherto been able to do when we rested our glasses at arm's length upon the table, and felt good, and thoughtful, and forgiving. Then Harris, who was sitting next the window, drew aside the curtain and looked out upon the street. It glistened darkly in the wet. The dim lamps flickered with each gust. The rain splashed steadily into the puddles and trickled down the waterspouts into the running gutters. A few soaked wayfarers hurried past, crouching beneath their dripping umbrellas, the women holding up their skirts. "Well," said Harris, reaching his hand out for his glass, "we have had a pleasant trip, and my hearty thanks for it to old Father Thames, but I think we did well to chuck it when we did. Here's to 3 men well out of a boat." And Montmorency, standing on his hind legs, before the window, peering out into the night, gave a short bark of decided concurrence with the toast.